What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Lore Chronicles. I am your host, Willoughbys, and today we are going to be talking about a deck that is making a ton of waves in the meta right now. When you hear Amber Emerald, your brain might go to Circle of Life, but that's not what we're talking about today. We're actually talking about Kevin. Kevin, the flightless bird. She is terrorizing community members left and right in a way that you may not expect. This is a deck that has absolutely no characters in it most of the time and completely beats most decks in the format. But you don't want to hear about it from me. Let's, of course, bring in a guest to talk all about this deck that I think you really need to either know how to play or know how to play against. We're bringing in Dad Lore. Hello, welcome to the Lore Chronicles. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on. Excited to be here and excited to talk about this deck I've been having a lot of fun with at the start of set 13 meta.
Yeah, I mean, I've been seeing your tweets, and I think a lot of the community has. I feel like you're one of the first people that I saw playing it. I know that you said publicly that you saw it from someone else, kind of have been tweaking and iterating on it yourself. But regardless, I think you've been having a lot of success online in your playtesting with the deck, and it's been really fun to just kind of keep up with your evolution of it. So I wanted to bring you in. I wanted to do a little bit of a deck guide for my audience to at least be aware of the deck, even if they're not gonna pick it up. But before we get into all that stuff, let's learn a little bit about you. You're called Dad Lore. You've shared with us that you are a proud dad, which is awesome. Do you play Lorcana with your family?
I do. So I got into Lorcana just because I'm a huge Disney adult and I have my daughter who's 5 now, my wife. We love going to the parks and we kept seeing it at the Target stores and thought, hey, this might be up our alley because we do like games. And we bought a couple starter packs around Azurite Sea and really never looked back. So we've been having a
Oh.
great time with the game and playing. Just me and my wife has been fantastic. And then my daughter loves to help us collect the cards, rip boosties, and take some of the cards down to the parks and get them signed by the characters. So a lot of fun. And as soon as we get her able to read, I'm sure she's going to want to start playing as well.
That's super awesome. Listen, you mentioned the parks. I'm just saying, Kevin is at Animal Kingdom. You can meet her. I'm not sure how she would sign the card, but it might be something we need Dad Lore to do in the future and see in a tweet. But that's super awesome. You mentioned you've been playing since around like Azurite C or so. So I see that you've been playing for a year, which is awesome. Welcome to the community. It's good to see somebody who hasn't just been here since day one, still finding success competitively in the game. And it's really cool to see your commitment to the game, right? Like, not only did you go to Milwaukee and Richmond, but seeing you go all the way out to Ghent shows that there is a level of dedication, interest in this game, kind of, that you're really trying to make happen. And I think, like you mentioned here in some of your player information, the top 50 presence on Fight Club is significant. And even taking down set champs, I mean, it just goes to show that there are plenty of amazing players that are grinding games and really helping shape the meta, even if we never hear about them in the way that we hear about people like Zan Syed and Ed Chu, who are doing these like insane things that really shouldn't be possible, right? So I'm excited to have you on. Make sure, if you haven't already, follow Dad Lorcana on Twitter. I want to dive into the deck though, so let's take a look at two different versions of the deck that you sent me. The first one we're gonna look at is the version without Kevin. Okay, so this is quote unquote the Kevin deck, but in
Yeah.
actuality, you can play it without Kevin, and in some cases you should, which we'll talk about in a moment. But can you just kind of break down just an overview, because we'll go through all the stuff specifically, but an overview of what the deck is trying to do?
Yeah, it's a pretty simple deck in a lot of ways. So at the start of the game, you're setting up these card item engines that are doing a number of things to generate value for you and use those to push into a board wipe like Storm. There's a few other ways to get there. There's a lot of cards and action cards that are going to help you delay your opponent long enough to get you to a state where you've kind of got total control of the board. Anything that they put down either gets taken out by actions in your hand, items on the board, or rendered in such a way that it either can't quest, it's questing for zero, and then eventually you out resource them because you've got the adventure book that's just going to let you double or triple draw every turn, and it puts a lot of decks in a really rough state. And at the same time, you have this advantage of, you're playing Lorcana, I'm playing Lorcana, but you're playing a very different version of Lorcana than me because you have characters and I have none. So everything in your deck that's going to interact with a character is going to become either useless or a brick.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is the thing that I've noticed about this deck is it is a control deck through and through. Sometimes in the way of people saying, how do you win? Depending on the draws, right? It feels like I don't understand how they're gonna beat me. I just know that I can't play the game. And we'll talk more about that as we look at these like card choices and kind of like optimum lines. But before we get into like the meat and potatoes, I do want to just show the version with Kevin. Can you talk about how the inclusion of Kevin changes the deck just a little bit?
Kevin makes the deck a lot more fun to play, a lot more punk rock. It's got a certain je ne sais quoi when the Kevin is
Mm.
there. He's a really fun character to have on the field. And then you can say, hey, I'm playing my only Kevins. I think in the big picture, he makes the deck a little bit more vulnerable
Mm.
because the advantage of this deck is, hey, I've got no characters. Your Thunderbolts aren't going to work. Your, Raging Storms aren't going to work. Your Under the Seas aren't going to do anything to this deck, and they are bricking your hand. A lot of times when you put out Kevin, your opponent's going to be like, oh, finally, now I can play X, Y, Z and at least handle this. On the other side of that, Kevin can be a great distraction. While your deck is actually running its alternative win condition, possibly Zootopias or Enigmatic Inkcasters. So you throw out a Kevin, and your opponent gets very laser focused in on that. When what they really need to be thinking about is, hey, I need to win this game before this person gets into their total control state. So Kevin can work well in that format.
Okay.
But with Adventure Book, you get to this point where, hey, Kevin's down, he's going to quest, he's going to jump right back on top of the deck. And in the same turn, I can put him right back in my hand with Adventure Book and maybe play him again depending on my state of control.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, that it started as the Kevin deck and has kind of evolved to not necessarily have Kevin. But I'm super excited to really, really start looking at some of, the card choices that are in here. You mentioned one enigmatic inkcaster, and I'm sure that will come up. I'll be putting the cards for anybody who's not familiar with what they do on the screen in post, so don't worry. But can you talk to some of the significant, oh, look at that right there, boom.
Yeah.
Could you talk to some of the significant cards that are in this deck? I know they all kind of like in this deck more than most have a true purpose, but some that stick out to me before you kind of dive into them is like obviously my adventure book. I want to hear about like what it's like playing Zootopia, things like why only 2 copies of Enigmatic Inkcaster, and of course, the map and Buzz's arm. So talk me through these card choices and why these cards are in here and how you leverage them, I guess, in this deck.
Absolutely. So the deck list that I sent to you that has no Kevin in it, that's the one I kind of put together myself.
Yeah.
And it has no Kevin, and I've played about 300 games with that online now, with
Wow.
about a 55% win rate, and about 60 of those losses are just to that Princess Aggro deck, which
Yeah.
you almost have no shot into. I measure that at about 10%, but the beating heart of the deck is the Buzz Arm and the Adventure Book.
Hmm.
That missing those can cost you the game, and gaining those can just make it unfair, depending on the number of those, especially the Buzz Arms. So your ideal play is that Buzz Arm on 2, use it to play and exert an adventure book on 3 to generate a card right there.
Hmm.
And then you just start getting to that point where, hey, I'm drawing all these resources now. I'm double drawing while you're single drawing, and I start putting more and more items on the board that, yeah, you're going to get up to 16 lore most of the time, but once you get there, you're not getting any further.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
adventure book just keeps you generating those cards. So it's like, hey, I got one card. It's not the answer I need. Let me get another one. Not the answer I need. Sometimes you have 2. Let me get a third one. There's the answer I need, whether it's a storm or a strange things, just to slow them down a little bit more. So the beating heart and the circulatory system is the adventure book and then the Buzz's arm.
Yeah. So talk to me about the use of locations in this deck, Zootopia, I think most people have seen. You have another one that I thought was very interesting. I almost didn't catch it at first. This game preserve, which I think the text doesn't actually matter because we don't have any characters. So talk to me about those two locations and how locations kind of function in this deck.
So this deck is typically going to save or mulligan locations till you gain control. So if I see a location early, I know that's going to be instant ink. Unless maybe I'm dropping a Zootopia on the draw on turn one as a distraction for you to say, hey, focus on this, throw some people at it, and you're going to buy me 2 more turns where you're not questing, and I can get to my control state. Otherwise, I'm using those cards probably after I've done a Raging Storm and I've wiped your board, and now I've dropped a game preserve down and a Zootopia. And if my adventure books are doing what they're supposed to do, I'm going to stop you from being able to address them. And in a few turns, that's going to be the game.
Yeah, so game preserve being added in then, is it just more lore? Was it something that you found in your testing you just needed a little bit more to get you over the edge, or was it something that you think it's just a good idea from jump? It was never enough to just have Zootopia and Inkcaster.
Absolutely. I like the game preserve because it's got 2 lore pips on it. And so there's a state of the game where I can put it down and stop you from dealing with it. And now I can win the game much quicker than I can with Zootopias or with enigmatic Inkcasters. It's a
Okay.
little easier to deal with for some folks, but I've found it plays very well.
Yeah, sure. And so is that, I think also having this location, do you feel like that's what enables you to come down on Inkcasters? Because I don't know, because I haven't played much of this deck, but playing against it, I've always seen people on 4. So seeing you on 2, is it because you feel like with that extra location, it kind of gets you there?
Yeah, and the game preserve is inkable, and enigmatic Inkcaster is not.
Hmm.
So 2 more of those, and my ink uninkable count is just very high. And I've had games where that's cost me the game.
Yeah, fair enough. Actually, good point. I just want to point out the stats. It's 60 cards, 14 uninkables, 18 items, 18 songs, 17 actions, and 7 locations. So again, notably 0 characters. Super interesting the way that this plays. I think you did a great job talking about, kind of things like that adventure book, leading into the Buzz's arm as well. So I want to talk about the matchup spread a little bit here. I know you mentioned that you've got 300 games in and about a 55 win percentage, but you estimate, it sounds like, about 10% of those losses are to just your straight up worst matchup. So in essence, that just kind of happens, right? You're gonna have those. But break down maybe some of the bigger decks that you at least see most frequently, things like Circle of Life, maybe even like Amethyst Steel, or if you've played against Ruby Amethyst as it's began to rise, Amber Steel. Like, what do you find your win percentage to be into those decks, and how do you feel in terms of being favored against all those different things?
Absolutely. So starting with probably the easiest matchup on my side of the table, it's Amber Amethyst, the yellow purple,
Oh yes.
and I've got about an 85% win rate in that online. And I've played a game recently where I got completely bricked. Everything went wrong, and I still ended up winning it just because the deck plays so well into that deck.
Oh wow.
The Horseman Strikes, the World's Greatest Criminal Minds all have great targets in that deck. It's not going excessively fast, so you have time to get to your storm. You have time to slow them down and get to your end state. And while it can hold card draw, it has nothing to take any of your items off the board at all. And so eventually you're just going to overwhelm them with items on the board that can shut down anything they're trying to do.
Yeah, so that's a good point. That deck has actually been doing a lot better lately, and it is a growing contender in the meta. But I do think this deck, like you said, really, really shuts it down. Again, I think aggro, kind of obvious, is just one of those auto losses. They're just a little too fast to pull them back in the end. But
That's
how do
too
you
fast.
find? Have you played against things like Ruby Amethyst, specifically like invasive variants, or not really much so far?
Ruby Amethyst evasive variants typically have the same weaknesses that the Ruby um, Amber, or
Okay.
sorry, the Amber Amethyst are going to have.
Hmm.
The evasives gives you a ton of targets for your Horseman Strikes, which have 4 copies. The Peter Pan is a great target for World's Criminal Mind, so I'll typically save that one. Once Peter Pan makes the other characters evasive, I'll use the pumpkin on those ones, and then Criminal Mind on Peter Pan. And then also, they don't have much to deal with your items, so they take that Raging Storm, and they have a tough time getting back in the game after that. You drop your items, or you kind of outvalue them with your Pneumatic Inkcaster and the amount of card draw you can do with Adventure Book.
Interesting. What about Ruby and Amber? Kind of another control deck in the meta. I've heard some people say they have trouble with it. I don't know if it was maybe different iterations. Have you played much against that deck?
Absolutely, that is the most fun matchup
Mhm.
for me because it's so fair. It feels like with this matchup because what they're gonna do is drop Scrooge's Counting House on you and start boosting it like crazy and force you to either be able to deal with that or lose in like 3 turns.
Mm.
That's the reason I have Sabotage as a 4 of in my deck because I will sit there and I will sabotage those counting houses and then I can kind of gain my advantage to shut down everything else they have.
Mm.
But if you don't find a sabotage, they will win.
I see. I think there was an earlier consideration for Freeze the Vine, but I think are you all in on Sabotage now?
Yeah, so I've got a slightly changed deck that I've kind of sleeved up, and that's got 4 sabotage. But I'm still back and forth on 2 and 2.
Yeah.
Um, but if you don't have at least 4 ways to remove locations, that deck's just going to eat you alive
Yeah.
by shifting over everything from its doing with characters to just going all in on locations.
Yeah. Super
And then any
interesting.
advice for any red yellow players? If you want advice on how to beat this deck, play your Scrooge's Counting Houses one at a time.
Mm, that's a good note. Look at that. You're so giving. You said, listen, here's an honest
You want to
counter.
beat me? Do them one at a time. Force me to deal with them, and don't give me the chance to double up and take 2 out at the same time because that's
Yeah.
going to be very beneficial to me.
Yeah, that's a good note. I think it's easy to like overextend even in a location way, right? Like we see it with characters all the time. People would overextend into things like Be Prepared, Raging Storm, Under the Sea. And against this deck, you can overextend locationally. That's something I didn't even think about. Okay, I think the last big one maybe is Amber Steel. How do you feel you fare into Amber Steel?
Amber Steel's another great 50-50 matchup. You have to be very, very good with this deck and very skilled to slow them down long enough to get them into your storm range before they just beat you with the amount of questing power that deck can generate. Your advantages are that their thunderbolts become useless, but that's really the only one right there. And if they're running, I find in my Platinum, you're in for a rough ride, especially if they play it really smart,
You know
because they're
what?
just going to beat you right there. But there are ways to get around that. There was a Malin Lee that pulled and I find in my Platinum on me, and so I held back my items until I was able to let them expend it, and most people aren't on a lot of those. So once I got on the other side of that first I find in my Platinum, I was able to pour my items back out and slow them down long enough to win the game there.
Wow, that's really cool. I was gonna say I think what's interesting is like the only reason you play I find in my Platinum is because of this deck realistically, and so I
Yeah,
think that speaks to the true power of this deck, and it's really a reason why I wanted, the sheer strength of this deck is really the biggest reason that I wanted to make a video about it, because it's one that if you do not know what it's trying to do and your game plan into it right away, like as soon as you see what it is, you are going to lose. Like this is not one that you can kind of like learn, on the fly. And I think it's one that people really, really do need to be aware of. So I know we talked about some popular play lines already. I know there's not a ton because this deck is, very linear in terms of what it's trying to do. But before we kind of look at a little bit of alter advice, can you just talk about your most popular play lines? Obviously, like when you have Buzz's Arm and Adventure Book, and then also when you don't have those things, what you try to do.
so the best strategy for this deck is to set up that engine if you can, and if not, buy for time as much as you can. You want to stall your opponent out and buy for time until you can get to that state where you do have enough items on the board that are adding value. And you hit that storm and force them to recover from that, and becomes very difficult when you just keep pumping out inscrutable maps or potions of malice and dealing with everything they put down as their card draw diminishes and you eventually hit that adventure book and now you're double drawing and pushing them further and further away. So some strategy lines that I'll play with this deck typically will get people impressed when you run the malicious, mean, and scary, and then use your potion of malice as secondary effect to make the entire board reckless, so they can't quest. So you kind of get to freeze what can sometimes be a very wide board for a full turn, and for your deck, another turn where they're not questing is huge for you because you're building up to that raging storm or your condition where you can wipe the board. So that's a pretty clever move if timed right? Because you're sacrificing the potion of malice to do it. So you're losing a really valuable item in the hopes that you're going to get to a state where it was worth it by stopping them from winning.
Yeah, that's a super interesting note. You said that, and I hadn't even considered that. But you're so right. I think most people, like you're saying, kind of use this first ability of Potion of Malice, put 1 damage counter on chosen character, especially when you have multiple of them. It's kind of just a way to get things off the board, right? But I think that makes a lot of sense. And like looking at Malicious, Mean, and Scary now in the deck kind of shows, yeah, they kind of go. They're like their own board wipe in like a bail you out kind of way, less of like a board wipe because they don't go away forever, but like you said, sometimes just that little bit of stall draws you into the next strange things that you need, or something else that can kind of sort of free you up. So yeah, really, really good note. Anything else that you think you want to mention before we get into the altar?
That's just a huge play, especially into Amber Steel when they are going wide, to hit them with that at the right time so that you can just get to that Raging Storm. And Amber Steel specifically struggles to get it back in the game after taking a Raging Storm. Uh, so chaining strange things together can be huge if you get that opportunity to just keep stopping them from questing and then eventually building up your board state where it needs to go. We already talked about using Zootopia as an early distraction. It can be very helpful. And then comboing Piercing Attack with Wither the Flower or Malicious, Mean, and Scary with Wither the Flower can be a board wipe in lieu of Raging Storm. And one thing I'll do when I play is I hold on to my Raging Storms until the point where not playing it will absolutely lose me the game. So if I have any possible way to just accept the lore gain for the opponent or remove something another way, I'm going to use that before my Raging Storm.
That's interesting that you say that, like, you try to keep that Raging Storm as long as you possibly can, even if it means they get very close. Probably because this deck is so good at kind of clawing back. So that's something that you do. Would you say that's like patience for this deck is really important, and trusting that, like, I guess that this deck plays from behind intentionally?
Yeah, this is a difficult deck to play in the sense that you're going to be very uncomfortable if you're not either skilled with it or you're used to playing, Lorcana, where you're typically going kind of neck and neck with your opponent. In this deck, you're often 0 to 16 lore, and that's when your game starts to turn in your favor. So if you're not comfortable with your opponent coming right up to the edge of 20, it's going to be a scary deck to play.
Yeah. Oh,
Whereas
so
when
fun.
you get more comfortable in this deck, your opponent might get the 19 lore, and that's when you're like rubbing your hands together and like you're right where I want you.
Oh man, it's fun to see you talk about this deck. I feel like you just light up with some of this stuff. Let's get into some altar advice here. I'm not gonna do too much altar stuff. I think shout out to J-Bomb and Altar Academy. They do a really great job. I'd love to see you do something like that with this deck, but I will pull inspiration and just kind of show 7 cards here, which I need to show you. You need to be able to see these cards. So I'll share my screen with you. Just realized, all right.
Yeah, so I see the Wither a Flower, the Inscrutable Map, a Buzz Arm, a Storm, and a Potion, and there's 2 more.
Yeah, the next 2 are going to be Zootopia and another Inscrutable Map. So on the blind, let's say on the play, what would you keep and what would you alter?
This deck has a relatively easy alter, especially blind. So I'm taking that Buzz Arm. I'm happy I hit it, and I'm throwing everything else back, hoping to get an Inscrutable Map.
Wow. Okay. So or trying to get an adventure book, yes?
Oh yeah, an
Yeah,
adventure
okay,
book.
just making sure. All right, so looks like we hit it. So we have World's Greatest
Sure.
Criminal Mind, Sabotage, My Adventure Book, Buzz's Arm, Family Scattered, Piercing Attack, and Malicious, Mean, and Scary. And so what would be, I mean, we're not going to obviously go through any more, but just in general, like looking at these as your fresh 7, you're not drawing off the top of the deck. What are you going to ink here first?
First thing, the piercing attack is going away because I'm going to play my buzz arm on turn 2, and I'm going to be drawing a 2 cards off the event or extra card on the adventure book on the turn after the buzz arm. I'm going to hang on to that sabotage until I know what the deck is, because it
Hmm.
might be auto ink or it might be the most important card in my deck, depending on who I'm playing.
Yeah, that's a good note. Okay, cool. Let's do it one more time for on the blind on the draw. So we'll get a new 7 here. It's going to be Game Preserve, Zootopia, Raging Storm, Buzz's Arm, Inscrutable Map, To Wither a Flower, and another Inscrutable Map. You're on the blind. You get 1 draw off the top here when you get to start. What are you thinking of keeping? What are you throwing away?
Buzz arm staying, of course. Uh, Everything else would go. Now, if I had an adventure book, might hang on to the Zootopia and then throw away anything that's uninkable.
Oh,
But with
okay.
no adventure book, I gotta throw the Zootopia as well. Although this would be a great one drop potential distraction card being on the draw. On the play, never.
Okay, very interesting. So let's throw those 6 away, see what we get here. We find Strike a Good
I'm on
Match,
Zootopia.
Zootopia, Zootopia, Buzz's Arm, Horseman Strikes, Enigmatic Inkcaster, and Strange Things. So we do not end up seeing the My Adventure book here, but we do have some draw cards in here, Strike a Good Match being one, for example. So what do you think? Obviously, you would also draw one more card, but not knowing what that is, what do you think your first ink would be, and what would be your hope at least playing with this, starting 7 to see in the future for your next couple turns?
No, this isn't a bad hand at all. You ink one of the Zootopias, you play the other as a distraction. The buzz arm comes down on 2. You hope you're getting an adventure book, and you hope you're playing a deck where something is going to be able to get hit by that Horseman Strikes, be it a Dumbo that they're putting a lot of hope into being a
Hmm.
card draw engine for them, or something from a Peter Pan type deck.
Wow, very cool. I love seeing how like fast your mind goes, and like to me, I'm like, oh no, we didn't hit the book, and you're like, no, this is a great hand.
Now we'll hit the book eventually. The card I like the least right now is the hit enigmatic Inkcaster. Just because I'm not going to be doing anything with that right now. I won't be able to play 2 cards a turn for some time.
Hmm.
So the strike a good match might be a good way to. Do we have one of those right now?
Yes,
I
we
can't
do.
see
I
that.
know you can't see that card, but yes, it's in hand.
A great way to dump that out of the hand and try to get something better on the turn after the buzz arm if we still haven't hit something more important.
Yeah, that's a really good note because I think like for players like me, like I see Enigmatic Inkcaster, I know that I only have 2 in the deck, and I'm like, oh, I can't discard that with Strike a Good Match. I need to just hold this until I can play it. But I think you showing, that you can't overvalue these cards. You have to play the hand that you're given, not, the hand that you wish you had. And so this is a hand where if you're not seeing what you need to see, yeah, you're gonna have to use your tools. And Enigmatic Inkcaster clogging up the hand is a really great one to get rid of right now until you get to a state where you can come back. And I think it kind of goes back to what you were saying about being okay with playing from behind. That for me makes me very uncomfortable. That's why I won't play this deck personally. But it really shows, your comfort with that. So very cool. Anything else you want to talk about regarding the altar before we kind of talk about some other overall thoughts?
Yeah, just the altar in general. So it's easy blind because you're just looking for that buzz arm and that adventure book really, really hard. If you get those, just dump anything out of the hand that's uninkable so that you don't get gummed up. Those will come back in later and be used accordingly. But if you are going into red yellow, save your sabotage, save your freeze the vine and hold on to them because once that Scrooge County house comes out, that's going to take you out unless you can draw those cards. So hold on to those if you know you're into a green blue giant Mickey card, hang on to those world's criminal minds because it's
Yeah.
going to be your only chance. If you see a giant Mickey on turn two, your only chance to shut it down is going to be world's greatest criminal mind.
Yeah, very cool. Good notes for sure. Really appreciate those. Let's do some overall deck thoughts and advice for players before we kind of get you on out of here. I think for me, a couple different things come to mind. Just knowing my audience in particular, my audience tends to be either like new completely to TCGs or like new to Lorcana. But there's like, we know what we're doing, right? Like we've been playing Lorcana. We feel like we have, you know, kind of good strategy underneath us, and we're slowly kind of making our way up the competitive ladder. We're just not 100% there yet, right? So do you like, who do you think this deck is best meant for on a skill level kind of perspective?
I definitely would not give this deck to a beginner that's trying to learn the game or trying to make their basic foundations of skill set and build that up. It plays, such a risky kind of strategy, and with how close your opponent is going to get to winning before, even in an ideal game, before you're able to turn the game around and execute your win condition, you're gonna have to allow them managing their lore as a resource to get very close to it. And okay, they're at 10, they're at 14, they're at 18. How much closer can I allow them while I execute what I'm doing? And for a lot of games, it's right up to 19, and it's intentionally letting them get there while you hold other resources back. They're at 19, but I have this many inscrutable maps and this many raging storms in hand. They're never going to get any further, so I'm letting them get there. And so I know it can be a very frustrating deck to play against, and it's been a little controversial seeing different folks talk about it online. But I think it's a deck in the meta like any other. It's got strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you said there about foundations. And this isn't a deck you would recommend if you're still working on building that kind of foundational skill floor for, even things like sequencing, right? Like draw first, I feel like would probably be something that comes into play so much in this deck because you need all the answers and then you need to kind of sequence from there correctly, and that makes a lot of sense. Like if you're still learning or working on improving those things and building those things, yeah, I think this is just going to be like unnecessarily a challenge for you, where you could play a deck that is a little bit more linear to really help demonstrate some of those foundations versus this is like once you kind of have your wits about you a little bit in that way. I'm curious, would you bring this deck to a big tournament? Now, I know that sounds silly because you've put 300 games on it, but the reason I ask is because I hear a lot of pro players and like very competitive players talk about how they just want to have the best deck, right? So it's either you have a deck that has really insane matchup spread, it wins most things most of the time, or you play, but maybe it's fragile on the draw or something, right? Or you play a deck that's a little bit more consistent and fair, so it's not that you have a 80% win rate, but you're kind of 50-50 and you'll leverage your own skill. So with this deck, we talked about some auto losses, we talked about some matchups that are 50-50, some that are really strong. This wouldn't be everyone's first pick for a big tournament. So with that in mind, would you bring this to a big tournament?
So that's a great question. I don't know if I've fully settled on the answer yet. I'm going to
Mhm.
the LCQ here in a few weeks, and this is the deck I've put all my energy into, and that might be a large mistake. So there's a few things that I would say don't bring this to a tournament about, and especially the LCQ because that's single elimination. You get one loss and you're out of there. Um, Anytime this hits aggro, you have a very small chance of winning. You can get there, but it's a very rough road. You kind of have to get your best hand, and they kind of have to get their worst hand, and you need to be on the play. And you're like, "Ha, I got you now, maybe."
Mhm.
Um, so, and the amount of aggro you expect to see at a tournament like that, you're thinking maybe 20% at the conservative estimate of kind of the classic Eleanor Princess aggro that's been going around. So, I would not bring this deck to a large scale tournament that's as I'm figuring that as the LCQ just for that reason. Would I bring this deck to a set champs? I can or I will for sure enter that as a dark horse. A lot of the set champs in my area I know aren't heavily focused on aggro, and you can go to a set champs, you can take a loss, and you can still make top eight. You can still walk home with the mat. So I think for set champs, it's going to be a great choice. I think for a large tournament, unless you can guarantee you're going to be facing yellow purple, red purple, and purple red every single match, it's probably not going to be a very strong competitor there. There's another thing about this deck that kind of has me worried about bringing it to any kind of in-person event is
Mm,
just the speed at which it plays. It plays very patient to a
mm.
fault. So unless you are really, really rehearsed with it and can go incredibly fast on your turn, you're risking not being able to finish your games by bringing this deck specifically, because it will drag out a game, unfortunately, because you're going to get up to 16 lore for your opponent. You would be at 2 or 0. Then you're going to have control, and it's still going to take you a number of turns, regardless of you having full control, to actually put 20 on the board.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Risk of slow play, not even like literally in terms of you or your opponent needing to call a judge, but in terms of, like you said, the game's just not finishing. I really appreciate you being honest in this way about this deck. I think it's really easy for people who've spent so long on a deck to kind of fall on that sword, die on that hill. And I think seeing you talk about this openly and saying, here's why, it has some good things going for it, but you have to really be aware of, one, what is the meta in the room, and two, how rehearsed are you? Because if you are not, like, I go to time on decks that should not go to time, because I'm still learning some of those things. So I think that's good to know, and I really do appreciate you being open about that. I think that helps give a really well-rounded view of the deck for people, and I think it helps the conversation because, like I said, whether my audience is going to pick this up or not, I wanted to showcase this deck because I think it's one that you need to be aware of. And so, just like you said, even if, some people are moving off of it, there's going to be plenty of people that are like, no, I am playing this. I think it's cool, or I like this play style. And now, if you're up against it, to be aware of the clock. So really, really great note there. Is there just like any other overall thoughts that you want to share about this deck? Any shout outs you want to give as well to just like anybody who's kind of helped you in this journey?
Yeah, for sure. I would give a shout out to Sploosh Magoo, the winner of the Indianapolis champ. He's the one that kind of sent me the deck list. I was in line trying to get one of the Princess Heroine boxes, and I was running droids. And then I matched into this deck where I didn't understand what it was doing. And I told my wife, hey, this deck hasn't played a single character yet. And then, like, nothing's happening. Uh,
Mm.
and she was like, does that intrigue you? And I was like, well, only if it wins. And then it won. And so I was like, I posted just a Hail Mary tweet of like, hey, does anyone has this deck list? I need to see it. And he was the one that replied and sent me the current list. And then he replied later to me after I was posting some of my replays that he thought he created a monster. But I do appreciate him sending me that list so I could get started on it. And then everyone in my locals area that have let me test this with them, I know it can be a frustrating deck to play against, but at least they paid me the compliment of saying I've play the deck faster than anyone they've seen online, which I think is something you need to do with this deck is get yourself to where you can play it faster. You're going to be up against that clock. Like if you don't have every line you need to do rehearsed, and you're thinking about your turns extensively, the time is really going to eat you up.
Yeah. Wow, really cool. Oh man, Dadlore, it was so awesome speaking with you. I feel like you gave some really sound advice, and it was a really, really awesome conversation. I really appreciate you coming on the channel. I know you mentioned you're going to be at the LCQ. Just announced I am also going to be casting at the LCQ, so I really hope, whether you pick this deck or not, that we can see some of your matches, because it's just been so awesome getting to know you a little bit. You're welcome back on Lore Chronicles anytime. You have, or Sploosh has, definitely created a monster for sure, but I think it's a good thing. I think people, you're so giving with your advice. You've said a lot of great things. I think you've helped people even know how to counter it. So truly, 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 thank you so much for coming on to Lore Chronicles. I really appreciate it.
No, it's been my pleasure to be on this podcast. Thank you so much for the invite. I love talking about Lorcana. I don't think I'm at the level of player where I'm allowed to keep any secrets. I'm an open book about what I'm playing and what I'm thinking through. And so anytime anyone online has asked me for the deck list, I'm instantly post it or wants any tips or advice. I've had a few folks that have like been in my DMs going back and forth with their iterations or sending me their replays. And I've always been really excited to talk with them about the deck. So it's been really fun to go through. And yeah, I can't reveal if I'll actually bring this to the LCQ currently because I don't have that knowledge either.
Fair enough. Well, I really appreciate it. You said it yourself. You're not gonna gatekeep. No gatekeeping in Lorcana. Go follow Dadlore to keep up to date with this deck and anything else that he may be up to. Thank you once again for coming on. But to my audience, now you're ready. Go break some hearts, okay? Go play this Kevin Flightless Bird. Show everybody what you are made of. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to leave a thumbs up, leave us a comment, let us know how awesome Dadlore was. I really appreciate him coming on. Appreciate our channel members. You make this possible. Join our Discord for awesome Lorcana advice, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.